Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for April of 2026. There are 10 albums I'm going to be talking about in this video that I spun throughout April with time codes listed in the description as always for each individual review. If you'd like to skip around in this video, there is a request I got out of the way along with a handful of things that I got to throughout April that did drop throughout the month and a little bit of catch up for good luck. And a little bit of catch-up for good measure, something that'll be happening throughout the May listening log update as well, but I digress. Let's go ahead and get started. Give it a like if you're excited, and the first album we're going to be talking about is... I'm going to start this video by getting the one review I have off the docket, and that is the new Neurosis album, Undying Love and Undying Love for a Burning World. And album I'd already seen getting a lot of buzz, but admittedly wasn't going to get to if until later in the year because similarly to a band like Coroner last year, I just don't have much knowledge of Neurosis. They're a band that's in a blind spot for me. However, similarly to Coroner, if their stuff sounds like this, I can dig the sounds of their earlier stuff, I can assume. Not for the same reason, but like the production on this, similarly to that Coroner album, very much feels tied to an era, but tries to bring like a modern shine to those sort of traditional sonic ideas. You know, the way the riffs sound, the way that the heavy riffs crunch and sort of drive on some tracks like the opening march of We're Torn Wide Open, or the way they cut through the haze on tracks like First Red Rays and Seething and Scattered, where they almost blend with a psychedelic sheen to some other riffage to help create this sort of like blending cocktail. I think it's a really good combination, but I also love what this album does to both cement those traditional sounds in a more modern sheen, but give lyrics that more cement it in the now. You know, like there's a real blunt bleakness to the world described on this album, and it feels all too real. It takes time to set us all up as lurching bugs in the weaving web of society. It really has this cynical look at things that I think gets more realized and given weight when feelings of hope are expressed throughout the likes of Untethered and In the Waiting Hours. It is an album that sort of comes around mood-wise, but uses that intensity to help fuel that shift. It's honestly a really well-constructed album, and I like that the band takes time to let the listener stew in these moments of intensity and sparsity. You know, the synthetic ambient passages are just as interesting to me as the moments of intense waves of the guitar between them. I like this album a lot, honestly. I think that it's a really strong album. For a year that's had admittedly some highs, but not as many highs as I was hoping to find by this point. This is one that continues to climb for me as one that I very much enjoy. I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. I think this album is fantastic. If you like intense music that takes its time with the listener, that has a very classic production backing it all, you can't really go wrong with this. What is left to say when you've made up your mind? You know, it's funny, not too long before he announced this album, Distracted, I was talking to a buddy at work about how badly I was wanting a new Thundercat album, because I love Drunk, and I love It Is What It Is. Especially, I love what It Is What It Is does to see him, like, go on a bit more of, like, a spacey odyssey with his love of funk and bring it, like, in a jazzier world. Something that I was excited to see him potentially follow up, but while in Distracted, we do get samples of that. I don't necessarily hate where he takes his sound on here. You know, it very much has a bit more of an embrace of soul and a couple of flavors that I think work really well in his favor. You know, he still keeps it funky in a both vintage and modern sense throughout the lenses of the Mac Miller collab, She Knows Too Much, which helps strike to sort of like the emotional core of this album is sidestepping amidst emotional conflict. But you also see it on the contemplative and intimate Walking on the Moon, both of which I think hit really well. That said, I feel like the soul in strictly pop hook focused lane is where I feel like a lot of this sits, for better and worse. You know, I enjoy the the soundscape of the Lil Yachty collab. Same with the A$AP Rocky collab, and I think that those are two pretty solid joints. I also enjoy the almost Quiet Storm influence that you can see throughout parts of the Sonics of the Willow collab Thunderwave, like the use of organs across the Lemon Twigs collab and sprinkled throughout the atmosphere of the Flying Lotus Lil Yachty collab. I did this to myself. There's a love of like an older vibe of soul that I think is interesting to see Thundercat embrace, which I also think are handled very well. There's just a handful of moments on here where it feels like the album gets a bit like just okay. You know, there's still a solid hit ratio here, but for every track like the ones I listed, you get like an Anakin Learns His Fate or a No More Lies, which I don't think is like the worst collab, and like it's cool to see Thundercat work with another like just popular artist in the veins of Tame Impala. But I also think that the album kind of spins itself around in its final stretches sonically while trying to keep its message a bit more focused in a way that I think is like, it's not bad, but I think he's just done more interesting things on an album side of things. I dig the overall through line of this project though as a whole, and I really enjoy seeing him tap into different influences pretty amicably. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. It's a really solid album that I think continues to showcase Thundercat's prowess as a song crafter. I don't know if this will rank amongst my favorites with it in the review, honestly.
But look what you've gone and done. That doesn't sound like fun.
I, like many in the Nine Inch Nails fan community, were waiting with bated breath to see what this collaborative 9-inch Noize album was gonna be, especially following the fantastic Coachella set. It was nice to see the actual release be just the best compiled version of what that live set ended up being. I love the remixes. This album is fucking awesome. It's cool to see Trent even vocally work in the reinterpretation world as well, helping fit the mood of these new mixes. I love seeing Mara Queen pop up as well and add to the sonic tapestry. It's cool to see them once again give love to How to Destroy Angels as a whole with Parasite. Just the refilthifying of tracks like Heresy and The Warning, adding a wholly different but tangential atmosphere to tracks like Copy of and Came Back Haunted. I dig how this takes so many different sides of the Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross collaborative pot and giving them this new world to live in. I personally would have picked some different songs if we're digging like throughout different parts of the catalog. Mostly in the vein of, like, that Tron song. I'm glad they're liking it. It's a good song, but, like, it would have been cool to hear a bevy of other different songs in the Nine Inch Nails catalog in this world, and not this one. I'm still giving this an 8. I really, really enjoy this thing. I think if you haven't listened to the set they did at Coachella, or just this album, you should really do so. It's a really cool set of noisy-ass reinterpretations of some classics and niche faves from at least my personal favorite band, but a lot of other people's beloved band as well. You know, if you were to ask me what I would guess a Skindred album would sound like in 2026, I don't think I would land too far off from the ideas of this, especially considering, like, on their last album, Smile, they sort of just reaffirmed what lane they were in as far as a legacy act at this point would be, where you're gonna get some heavy shit, you're gonna get some more straightforward reggae stuff, you're gonna get some positivity, and on You Got This, you kind of got that again, but with even more of, like, a modern sheen that, like, you could take or leave depending on how much that really bothers you. I think the only instance where I feel like it doesn't work well is in the song Broke, especially considering the song Glass comes after it, which interpolates, like, a reggae-style groove into this build-up into a solid chorus, where I feel like, while Broke isn't the only Skindred song in its style, I think that production really plasticines the vibes in a way that I think detracts. You know, for an album that really aims to be bright and positive while it's got like a punchy production, that's the only time that it feels like it takes away from the energy a bit. But by and large, I think that like this album is like inherently inoffensively alright. Like, I personally am not a fan of some of the sonic ideas on tracks like Bonfidus or Big 'Em Up. I feel like if you're listening to Skindred, you would expect some of those ideas to be embraced at least at some point. And like, while they've probably done it worse, they've definitely done it better. Like, I'm not gonna throw on my people when I'm wanting to get like a hype nu metal party going, but I think that like the genre's seen worse in recent years. This album isn't going to be one that I think I revisit, not even as much as I did their last album, but I'm not going to say it's like gonna be on my worst of the year list. It's fine. It's fine. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. It's not like offensive, it's just like painfully alright.
Don't run away from your demons. You fight the Pasadena.
As far as surprise releases in the month go that, like, I easily kind of slid into my rotation considering when it dropped, was the new Shikari, Lose Yourself. An album that I wouldn't say I was, like, head over heels excited for, but I'm always interested to see what these guys decide to do with what they decide to do to harness their love of bright, bold energetics. I really thought that their last album was a bit of a mixed bag, but I was hoping that they could sort of refine that and create a much more elevated listening experience. And while I think they got the refinement down and made a more consistent album, I don't necessarily think it goes for that next echelon. I do think that it is like a really nice spin, though. And I think that if you dig what this band has done in the past to create a very direct song and its messaging, but back it with a huge love of electronics and gravitas, then you'll love what this album has to offer. For the sort of wild platitudes that are sort of thrust upon the listener out the gate with the title track, I think they do a good job to sort of ground that in a better reality than they did on their last album, throughout the lenses of Finding Out the Hard Way and Dead in the Water. You know, it very much presents like just kind of a harsh reality check amidst that sort of need for, I don't want to say an ego death, but something akin to that. You know, while this album does like to play with the fly-by track in the same breath of their last album, I do like how this one handles such an idea in the case of a track like I Can't Keep My Hands Clean. You know, it's got this much more like frantic, tense pensiveness that helps keep the energy high on a record that really tries to go bold in that energy, more so than I would say their last album even tried to. I love a good planting and payoff moment, as you guys know, and I think the Flick of the Switch 2-piece is a solid enough one at that. I even like the 3-piece that this album sends their sounds into the horizons with as well, via the Spaceship Earth trio. I also think they do tease that next step in some pockets, like throughout the theatricality on a track like It's Okay, that plays with this sort of like weird postmodern funk vibe that they push into their more sonic familiarity pretty solidly. There's just moments of that, the nuggets that tease something more that they only sort of like flirt with in moments that I do really appreciate on here. It's just a really solid little record from these guys that I think, again, helps tighten things up, and I dig the scope that they're aiming with. I just don't think they maybe quite get there for me personally. But I think it could for some people, and I could see people liking this more than me, but I still think this is a solid album at the end of the day. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. It's a really decent record that I think that, like, they definitely sort of, like, hit a new stride with throughout the track listing of. You know, while I haven't talked about Sunn since their 2019 collaboration with Steve Albini, Life Metal, I still look upon that album very fondly, but I decided to forego checking out what they dropped between then and now to just see what they're leaving us with their new self-titled album, Finally Here. It is an album that I dig the sonics of a lot, even if it isn't necessarily isn't as clean or as like nuanced as the stuff with Albini. I love that this feels more like coming home. Like there's a sound to this that sort of creeps in throughout the record that I think lends it to feeling more like what I'd expect for them, even if it still isn't necessarily as like lo-fi as what I normally had heard from them in the past. I think that like the overall sonics and sound throughout some of the more harsh moments, like on Does Anyone Hear Like Venom or Butch's Guns, the way that sort of like brings the listener in and out of this silence. It's just a really nice harshness that I loved hearing, or how like there's a slow roll that pairs with some of the rain sounds on like Mind Rolling or Everett Moses that makes it feel like home. I still dig the texturing on here, and I dig the sonics, I dig the guitars as a whole. I think that it feels more intimate than grand in scale, and I love that about it. It makes the noise hit a bit harder in a different sense, while finding ways to blend some peace amidst that dissonance that I still really appreciate these guys being able to pull together. You know, there's a moment throughout the opener, Zan, where a lot of the harsh sounds really sort of like melt away, and we're left with just this like almost like warm calm of a wave that carries the listener through this like back to the back half of this like 18-minute jaunt that I really like. This isn't a record that I would say I've spun and sat with as much as others in the year so far, especially this month. But because it is one of those like every song is 12 minutes and there's not really a whole lot of like song structure to it in the traditional sense, but it's one where like if you sit with the atmosphere, I think it does a good job at bringing the listener in on a cool sound that I think is worth your time if you like drone and ambient music. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. This is a really cool batch of tracks whose production, again, I really, really enjoy, and ironically enough, kind of feel the same kind of inspiration with, so to speak. But I digress in that regard. This album is great. You should definitely listen to it. I'm going to get my score out of the way for this review because there's an album earlier in this video that I gave the same score, but I want to split hairs on this numbering system that people get hung up on. This album is also getting a 5, because it is like maybe the most mediocre Foo Fighters album they've made since Medicine at Midnight. But the Foo Fighters are now also officially in like a yo-yoing season in their catalog. Because their last album, But Here We Are, saw them taking inspiration and doing something with it. But this album shows that without that inspiration, this band is just painfully okay. And I put painfully in a heavier emphasis because, man, their last album had focus, it had sonics, it had a vision. And while they sonically have a vision with Your Favorite Toy, they don't fill it with anything worth its salt in gritty production ideas. You know, the band clearly wants to write with an attitude, but I think in their age, they forgot what attitude sounds like on paper. You know, being caught in an echo is what this album feels like it has coursing throughout its veins. It's the truest thought the band put to paper, and it's what opens the record. Which is a real shame because I love the sonics of this album, honestly. I feel like the vocal production they do for Dave, while almost sounding like just a filter in some of the album's heavier moments, especially by the album's end, I'd like it more than some of the other attempts at, like, clean production they did for him in the past. It helps match the already dense guitar work that the band has coursing throughout its veins. You know, I think that, like, the band themselves also don't sound like as uninspired as they have on records that I would compare this to on a rating scale, like Medicine at Midnight. It just feels like they're trying so hard to hit with some purpose that they really forgot to kind of find that purpose. Instead, it spends its time browbeating and waving its bratty tail, like on Your Favorite Toy, or on Spitshine, or throughout some of its writing on Child Actor. I just don't like the voice with which this record speaks with, in a way that's like really frustrating, and it leads to a spin that I don't like to give in the same way that I have Foo Fighters albums in the past. It's a record that is like truly one that I will gladly leave in the rear view once I'm done filming this video, but it's like one that like feels so disappointing to say so. Again, it's a 5 out of 10 because I think that like, sure, it's got decent Sonic ideas, it just doesn't do a damn thing entertaining with any of it.
Spend it all.
As far as staying creatively engaging as an artist, James Blake has done a really good job at doing that. You know, I've really enjoyed watching the trajectory and sort of evolution of his Sonics throughout the close of the 2010s into the 2020s. And what I like about Trying Times is it continues to show him reinventing his roots, because a lot of the vocal work on here feels very reminiscent of stuff he was doing on records like Overgrown, where he was trying to grow from his roots. But what I like here is that we see him sort of nurturing that growth and creating a great melding of his sort of ability to pen yearning ideas into a cold soundscape, but how that cold soundscape feels very apropos to what purpose he's trying to sort of tell with that sort of yearning. You know, the image of spinning plates feels very apropos considering this album sonically tries to create its own juggling act of sorts, seeing James Blake do these sidesteps amidst worlds of comfort that I think he handles very gracefully. You know, that's been a real fun evolution to see James Blake sort of go into, but this record really tries to do some hard pivots gracefully that I think he just still sticks the landing on. You know, Trying Times, there Didn't Come to Argue, sees him having a more quote-unquote traditional sonic backdrop that I think melds well with the overt electronics on tracks like Days Go By, and the collab with Dave doesn't just happen. Like, the way he chops it up on Days Go By is classic, and I love that about it so much. And it works so well in the web he's trying to weave with the worlds of the sonics he's blending here. You know, parts like Rest of Your Life really feel more like intrinsically James Blake. Rest of Your Life, by the way, just an incredible flourishing out that I absolutely adore. And I feel like as far as capturing that yearnfulness in its truest form, I don't think it gets any better than that on the album. Which is something that the album sort of tees up out the gate with the likes of Walk Up Music and Death of Love, two songs that very much have that dance atmosphere that I would more expect from James Blake, just done very well. I really enjoy a lot of the mood of a James Blake album. I talked about that a bit in that List That Play video, and when I was making that, I had this in my rotation. I just wasn't working it into the playlist in question that I was making at the time. But I do think that like the sonics of this very much feel in line with what I love from James Blake, but they feel fresh in the same breath. I like this album a lot. I think that it's very good, and I think that it's got some fun, if not still like bleak ideas channeled throughout it that I like seeing James Blake continue to adapt. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. I think it gets his message across very earnestly while constructing that message very strongly.
I had to learn to read between the lines. Overboard when they mention me at times. Know the
I forewent talking about Kanye's Vultures era because, frankly, I wasn't the target demographic for it. Arguably, I'm not the target demographic for Bully, but I mean, like, I am more so than that Vultures stuff. I didn't like what I'd heard of it anyway. I put it on my worst of the year list because even creatively speaking, it just felt like the most bankrupt thing Kanye was trying to pull together to get a shock buck. But the thing about that is, on the other side of a shock buck, sometimes you find that creatively you're still not all that deep of a pool of ideas when it comes to stripping yourself away from that. And we see that throughout a lot of Bully. But I will say, there are some ideas that even if they feel like the biggest pastiche pulling that I think Kanye could try to muster to garner any goodwill back, some of those ideas are fine enough. You know, honestly, I don't think the album gets off on the most consistent foot. I think the opening track is a fine stage setter, but then it kind of stumbles a little bit after that, and I don't think the album really starts to get going proper until Punch Drunk starts. I don't really like the Travis collab. I don't like any of the tracks between King and Punch Drunk, but Punch Drunk has Kanye chopping up some soul in a way that's done really fucking nicely with the hook that feels very akin to classic Kanye. You see him still in there. While I don't necessarily like the attitude of tracks like Whatever Works or the title track, at least on the title track, the energy feels apropos because it is what's meant to sustain the moods and theme of the record. But it's that back and forth of being the bully that I don't think is as interesting of a concept as I think Kanye's trying to spin it. I think that also for an album that's 42 minutes in length, there is some wild fluff that feels very just sort of like wallpaper in the overall music and sonics of the album. Like Highs and Lows is a song that I don't think I'll remember 6 months from now. Same can be said for the like hackneyed loop job on Beauty and the Beast. I just really don't enjoy the moments where this album sort of sits in itself and lets the listener stew in its world. Because I don't think the world that you're stewing in is all that ripe with great ideas. Those moments really feel like the most tired points on the record and the points where Kanye feels like he's really sort of just playing the hits, so to speak, just to quote-unquote give the people what they want, even if he gives the people what they want in better parts of the album. It's obviously not as overtly offensive as the Vulture stuff, but I don't think it's clearing the bar of quality all that much higher into a world that I would say I wholly enjoy. While I don't think it'll end up at the top of my worst of the year list like his last outings did, if it doesn't end up on the lower end of said list, it'll be because I just didn't spin all that much I didn't like. But this isn't the worst thing Kanye's done. It just still isn't all that great. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. But I do see some of that light still in there personally. As far as being worth the wait goes, Hemlocke Springs' debut, The Apple Tree Under the Sea, absolutely fulfills that need. I've been following her ever since I got into her track Girlfriend a couple of years ago via TikTok, and I've been waiting for her to have this more full vision experience come out. And I gotta say, when it comes to personalities stepping out the gate with that personality on full display, Hemlocke Springs does that and executes that showing in glorious splendor. I really enjoy the identity with which she presents musically on here. There's a love of dramatics and a push and pull with gravitas in her delivery and instrumentation choice, synthetic choice, that I think pairs really well together. You know, you see this like catty reading off the lyrics on a track like Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Ankles that I think works well with the contemplative, pensive desires within WWWWW, which is easily one of my favorite songs of the year. I absolutely love that song. It's got a very classic feeling hook that I think she sells so very well. The same can be seen in the hook spinning on Parting the Sea Like Moses on Moses, or the Yearnfulness scene on Sever the Blight. That feels very classic in nature, but I think still works in a very modern sense. And I think that she sort of like creates a really nice backdrop for those emotions to sit, while letting her love of classic sounds also sit in a modern world, all the same, with their synth choice and use of synth pop ideas. You know, the build up on the Senses prelude and Senses track proper is the kind of like vision I was hoping to see come across on a record scale, and I think again just works fucking greatly. You know, it works to great effect, and I think that like that leading into the No Holds Barred Stop Close, that is the two-piece of Set Me Free and Be the Girl, helps round out this grand narrative in a very punctual sort of way. I love that about it. Again, when it comes to like having a vision, seeing the vision, and executing the vision, I couldn't have asked for better from Hemlocke Springs. And I think this is a great, still tight, but like infectious little album that like, if you missed when it dropped earlier this year, you owe it to yourself to give it a spin, because it is a strong-ass album that I just, damn, I think it's so very good and catchy. Sunn O's an 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 easily. It's just a great debut with a good ear for pop coursing throughout its veins. And that's what I listen to. Do you have opinions on what I spun? Do you not? Let me know those thoughts and anything you'd like for me to cover in the listening log update in the comments down below. Again, if you liked it, make sure you give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. I've been leaning on the 2 side lately, but I'm working on some fun stuff that I hope you guys are excited to see. I'm gonna go. I'm in Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.